A seed can sit in perfect-looking soil, under a soft layer of compost, with the sun warming the bed above it and the water soaking in just right, and still refuse to become the plant it was meant to be. Gardeners know that pain better than almost anyone. They kneel down with hope, they cover each little seed like it matters, because it does matter, and then they wait. Some come up weak, some never show their faces at all. Some emerge green and promising, only to fold over at the stem and vanish in a single night, as if the earth swallowed the future before it ever had a chance to begin. Most people blame themselves when that happens. They think they watered too often, or not enough. They think the weather was wrong, the seed packet was old, the moon was off, the temperature dipped, the soil crusted, the tray stayed too damp. But what if the real problem started before the seed was ever planted? What if the biggest mistake most gardeners make happens on the table, not in the garden? Because out along a creek bank after a storm, a slender willow switch can break off, land in wet mud, and do something almost unbelievable. No one buries it carefully. No one feeds it a miracle tonic. No one rushes over with an expensive bottle from a garden center. And yet that broken piece of willow begins sending out roots, pale white and hungry, from wood that looks like it should have been finished. It starts over where it fell. That is not luck. That is not folklore. That is not some old wives' tale floating around country gardens. That is chemistry written into the survival plan of a tree. And hidden inside that broken branch is a seed-starting advantage so powerful, so simple, and so strangely overlooked that once you understand it, you may never plant another seed dry again. I am Eli Yoder, and today I want to show you a 3-part soaking method that can completely change the way your seeds wake up, defend themselves, and build roots from the very first day of life. This is not about fancy products, rare powders, or secret formulas locked away behind glossy labels. It is about 3 ordinary things that together solve the 3 biggest challenges every seed faces. A seed has to wake from dormancy. It has to survive the danger in the soil. And it has to throw roots fast enough to support everything that comes after. Most gardeners only think about moisture. They think if the seed gets wet, nature will do the rest. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it absolutely does not. And when it does not, the whole season can get off to a weak, uneven, disappointing start that never fully catches up. This is why 2 gardens planted on the same weekend with the same varieties can end the summer looking like they were grown on different planets. The difference is often invisible in the beginning. It begins in those first silent hours when the seed is deciding whether to sleep, whether to split, whether to reach, whether to survive. That is where the real battle happens, not when the tomatoes turn red, not when the bean trellis fills out, not when the squash starts sprawling. The battle begins in darkness, before a single leaf ever sees the light, and if a gardener gives the seed help at that moment, real help, measured help, natural help, the payoff can echo through the entire season. The first ingredient in this soak begins with the willow tree, and there is a reason gardeners have been drawn to willow for generations. Snap a branch from an oak and leave it in water, and it usually decays. Break off a maple twig and toss it in the mud, and nothing much happens. But a young willow branch acts like a living promise. Give it moisture and time, and it seems ready to turn damage into a second chance. That is because willow tissue contains powerful compounds that support root formation, especially in young growth and the living layer beneath the bark. Long before companies packaged synthetic rooting products in tiny containers and sold them at premium prices, growers learned that soaking willow cuttings in water created an infusion that could be used to encourage rooting. There is something beautiful about that, but it is more than beautiful. It is practical. It means one of nature's strongest lessons in resilience can be borrowed and applied to the most delicate moment in a plant's life. When a seed first cracks, the earliest root tip that emerges is not a small detail. It is the foundation of the future plant. That first root decides how quickly the seedling anchors, how efficiently it reaches water, how aggressively it explores nutrients, and how well it handles stress once weather starts acting like weather. Gardeners tend to celebrate what they can see. They admire stems, leaves, blossoms, fruit. But roots are where the real decisions get made. A weak root system can keep a plant struggling long after the gardener has forgotten the sowing day. A strong root system can make a plant look almost gifted when really it simply started with an advantage. Willow water offers that kind of advantage. Not magic, not a fairy tale, not a promise that every seed will become a champion, but a real nudge toward stronger rooting behavior at exactly the moment it matters most. And here is the part that should make people stop and think. This is the same kind of natural support many growers now pay for in bottled form without realizing the tree itself demonstrated the principle first. Nature solved the problem before marketing departments ever learned how to print a label for it. Yet roots alone are not enough. A seed can produce a healthy little root, swell nicely, and still lose the race if the environment around it turns hostile. And soil can be hostile in ways most beginners never imagine. We speak about soil as though it is always gentle and welcoming, but the truth is more complicated. Soil is alive. It is rich, powerful, beautiful, and full of organisms. Some of those organisms help plants, some do not. The moment a seed coat softens and that embryo begins to move, it enters a world where fungi, bacteria, and stress can bring everything to a halt before the gardener even realizes something is wrong. This is why seedlings sometimes rise one day and collapse the next. The stem narrows at the soil line, the plant keels over, and the tray that looked so promising suddenly looks cursed. Gardeners call it bad luck because bad luck is easier to say than invisible disease pressure. But the truth is, many seeds die not because they lacked care, but because they entered the soil unprepared. That is where the second ingredient comes in, and it is almost laughably ordinary: a plain aspirin tablet. Most people know aspirin as something for headaches, fevers, aches, and daily routines. They do not think of it as part of a seed treatment. But the relationship between aspirin and plants runs deeper than most realize. The chemistry that inspired aspirin traces back to compounds found in willow, which means this humble tablet is linked to the very same tree that already gave us the first part of the method. That is not just interesting, it is revealing. It tells you that nature has always been working with connected systems, while people keep trying to divide them into products. When aspirin is used in a weak, proper dilution, it can support the activation of plant defense responses associated with stress resistance. In simpler words, it helps a plant prepare before trouble arrives. That matters because a seedling's earliest days are not the time you want it learning everything the hard way. A young plant that spends its first week under pressure may survive, but survival is expensive. Every bit of energy spent fighting stress is energy not spent on leaves, roots, stem strength, and future productivity. A plant that is gently primed before planting can respond faster and more efficiently when stress shows up. It is a little like warning a town before the storm hits, instead of after the wind has already taken the roof. The people inside can brace, they can prepare, they can act, and that changes outcomes. The same principle applies here. Seedlings do not need panic, they need readiness. Of course, this is exactly where people get into trouble if they hear only half the idea. The key is not throwing in more aspirin because more sounds stronger. More is not smarter in the garden. More fertilizer burns. More water rots. More sunlight scorches. More aspirin can become stress in the wrong direction. The power of this method is not excess, it is precision. A measured amount, used carefully, supports the plant without overwhelming it. That difference is everything. Still, even a seed that has support for roots and a head start on defense may hesitate if one final barrier remains intact. And that barrier is dormancy. Every seed carries a pause inside it, a built-in hesitation, a kind of biological handbrake designed to keep it from sprouting at the wrong moment. That pause is useful in nature, but in the garden it can become a source of frustration. Gardeners plant a row and expect life. Instead, they get uneven emergence, slow cracking, or trays where half the seeds wake up and the rest seem determined to ignore the invitation. They are not always dead. Often they are simply still waiting, still deciding, still trapped behind chemistry that says not yet. This is where the third ingredient changes everything: hydrogen peroxide. That plain brown bottle, sitting in medicine cabinets and bathroom drawers, is usually thought of as a disinfecting liquid, something for scraped knees and household use. But in a mild, diluted form, hydrogen peroxide can act like a wake-up bell for dormant seeds. It contributes the kind of oxygen-rich signal that helps push a seed out of its waiting state and into active metabolism. Once that process begins, stored energy starts becoming available, enzymatic activity rises, and the embryo stops acting like cargo and starts acting like life. This is why so many growers are shocked when a proper soak seems to speed up germination so noticeably. It is not because the seed is being forced in some unnatural way. It is because the seed is being given a clearer signal. Wake now, start now, move now. And once again, the amount matters enormously. In a correct dilution, hydrogen peroxide can help. In a strong concentration, it can do damage. This is not a splash and guess kind of practice. This is one of those moments where discipline creates the magic people later call effortless. The seed does not know your intentions. It only knows the chemistry it experiences. Get that chemistry right, and you can transform the way it begins. So step back and look at what these three ingredients are doing together. Willow helps support the earliest root response. Aspirin helps prime the young plant for stress and disease pressure. Hydrogen peroxide helps wake the seed and jumpstart the internal machinery of germination. Each one solves a different weakness. Each one handles a different stage of the beginning. And when they are combined into one simple pre-planting soak, the effect is not random. It is coordinated. It is a complete opening move. It is the kind of strategy that makes a gardener feel like they are finally working with the seed instead of just hoping the seed does its job. That emotional shift is one reason this idea spreads so quickly when people discover it. Because most gardeners are tired of feeling helpless at the start. They are tired of shrugging off poor germination as just one of those things. They are tired of blaming themselves for losses they could not even see. A method like this restores agency. It gives the gardener something real to do before the season gets away from them. And that feeling is powerful. It is the difference between planting nervously and planting with expectation. Now let me show you how the full soak is prepared, because knowing the why only matters if you also know the how. Begin with young willow growth, if you have access to it. You want fresh, flexible shoots, not old, dry, gray wood. Cut those young branches into short pieces, around an inch or so long, and bruise them lightly so the inner tissue is exposed. You are not pulverizing them into mush. You are simply opening the bark enough to let the water reach what it needs to reach. Place that cut willow into a clean container and cover it with room temperature water. Let it steep for 2 to 3 days. No boiling, no rushing it with heat. Gentle time does the work better here. As it sits, the water will gradually take on color, almost like a light tea. That infused liquid becomes your willow water. Once it is ready, strain out the twigs, then measure out 1 gallon of that willow water and add 1 regular uncoated aspirin tablet, standard strength, letting it dissolve completely. Stir it well. After that, add 1 to 2 tablespoons of ordinary 3% hydrogen peroxide. Not a stronger industrial concentration, not an aggressive guess, just the common household version in that modest amount. Stir again, gently. Now the soak is ready. Add your seeds and let them rest in this solution for about 12 to 24 hours before planting. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, cucumbers, squash, flowers, herbs, even many stubborn seeds that tend to take their sweet time can benefit from a proper pre-soak. During those hours, the seed coat softens, the embryo hydrates, the peroxide helps trigger activity, the aspirin contributes stress readiness, and the willow infusion supports the root side of the process. By the time the seed enters the soil, it is no longer just a dry package waiting for chance. It is a prepared living system already in motion. And that is a massive difference. Think about how often a season is decided by the quality of the start. A tomato that roots well early handles transplant shock differently. A bean that emerges strong competes with weather better. A pepper that establishes fast is more likely to become the kind of plant that actually carries a meaningful crop instead of spending half the summer trying to recover from a weak beginning. Gardeners love to talk about harvest, but harvest is mostly delayed evidence of earlier choices. The baskets in July and August are often just the visible reward for invisible discipline in March, April, and May. The strongest gardens rarely happen by accident. They happen because someone respected the opening chapter. There is also a quiet psychological advantage to a method like this. It replaces desperation with intention. Too many gardeners throw product after product at a struggling season because they started weak and spent the rest of the year trying to compensate. They fertilize harder, water more nervously, and chase quick fixes because the foundation never felt stable. But when a seed begins well, the entire gardening experience changes. The gardener becomes calmer, the spacing decisions get easier, the transplant timing feels better, the maintenance work becomes about support instead of rescue. A garden built on panic feels different from a garden built on confidence, and plants often reveal that difference faster than people expect. There is a reason experienced growers become almost protective of methods like this once they see them work. They remember the years when they planted on faith alone. They remember thin rows, spotty beds, and that sinking feeling when the neighbor's seedlings looked like they had been given a secret map while theirs were still wandering in circles. They remember overcorrecting out of fear, adding more water when the real issue was weak germination, adding more fertilizer when the real issue was poor root establishment, blaming insects when the real damage began before the sprout ever cleared the surface. A bad start confuses everything that follows. It can make a skilled gardener question good instincts and chase the wrong solution for weeks. But a strong start simplifies the season. When a tray comes up evenly, the light can be managed more calmly. When roots are vigorous, transplanting becomes less traumatic. When seedlings are sturdier, spacing decisions become more confident because the gardener is no longer guessing which plants will survive long enough to justify the room. That calm shows up everywhere. It shows up in the way hands move when they thin a row. It shows up in the way a person waters, no longer trying to save every weak stem with sheer devotion. It shows up in the way they walk out to the garden in the morning, expecting life instead of bracing for disappointment. And that matters more than most people say out loud, because gardening is not only physical work, it is emotional work. Every bed carries anticipation. Every tray carries a small private promise. People do not just grow food, they grow plans. They grow memories of summer meals, jars on pantry shelves, bouquets on the table, and the quiet pride of seeing abundance rise from something they planted with their own hands. That is why early failure hurts so much. It does not just reduce numbers, it interrupts imagination. This soak helps protect imagination by helping protect the beginning. Picture 2 cucumber seeds planted the same afternoon. One goes in dry, asking cold spring soil to do all the heavy lifting. The other goes in after a night of preparation, already hydrated, already activated, already nudged toward roots and readiness. For a while the difference may be invisible. Then one seed splits cleaner, one root reaches first. One seedling stands up with a little more purpose. A week later the lead is clearer. By midsummer, that early edge has turned into more vine, more leaf, more flower, and more chances at fruit. This is how gardeners underestimate beginnings. They look small, so they assume they stay small. But beginnings compound. A head start underground becomes momentum above ground. Momentum becomes resilience. Resilience becomes productivity. And productivity becomes the harvest people photograph and celebrate. Often without realizing, the turning point happened in a jar of soaking seeds days or weeks earlier. Even if a gardener only uses this method on part of the season, the comparison can be revealing. Try it on tomatoes, peppers, beans, melons, or flowers that usually test your patience. Watch which seeds swell first. Watch which sprouts break the surface more evenly. Watch which seedlings hold their color better through the first stretch of stress. A careful grower learns by observing, and this method gives you something concrete to observe. It turns vague hope into visible difference. That may be the strongest argument for it of all. Once the eye sees the pattern, the mind stops dismissing it as coincidence. And when enough seasons confirm the same lesson, what began as an experiment becomes a habit. That is how true gardening wisdom is formed, not from one lucky afternoon, but from repeated proof that a simple act done well keeps changing outcomes for the better. And if you are the kind of gardener who has almost given up on direct sowing because emergence feels too unpredictable, this is exactly the sort of method that can restore trust. It does not ask you to gamble harder, it asks you to prepare better. It respects the fact that seeds are living systems, not dry specks that should be expected to perform miracles on command. That respect changes outcomes. It also changes attitude. The garden stops feeling like a test you are failing and starts feeling like a relationship you are finally understanding. Once that shift happens, you do not approach seed starting with the same impatience anymore. You become more observant, more deliberate, more willing to support the hidden stages instead of obsessing only over what appears above the surface. And in gardening, the hidden stages are often where the future is won. Give them care there, and they repay you later with strength you can actually see. Often the biggest harvest gains do not come from adding more later. They come from shaping the first 24 hours, when a seed is quietly deciding what plant it can become. Now it is important to stay honest. No soak on earth will turn dead seed into living seed. No method removes every risk from nature. Cold can still slow things down. Flood can still punish a bed. Heat can still test the toughest plants. Bad genetics cannot be washed away in a bucket. But that is exactly why this protocol is so exciting. It does not pretend to replace real gardening skill. It strengthens real gardening skill. It gives a good seed a better beginning. It gives a healthy plan a sharper edge. It gives the gardener a practical way to improve the odds before the first row is ever covered with soil. That is where the real power lies. Not in fantasy, not in exaggerated promises, in better odds. And better odds, repeated across dozens or hundreds of seeds, can change the look of an entire garden. That is how small biological nudges become visible abundance, more even emergence, faster root establishment, tougher seedlings, better momentum, and eventually more of what every grower wants, plants that look like they mean business. This is also why garden centers and glossy advertisements can distract people from the simplest truths. A complicated product sounds impressive. A hidden protocol using Willow, Aspirin, and Peroxide sounds almost too plain to matter. But plain is not weak. Plain is often just overlooked. Some of the best methods in gardening feel unimpressive right up until the moment they work. Then suddenly they become unforgettable. And once a gardener sees that difference with their own eyes, it is very hard to go back to doing things the old way. So before you plant the next tray, before you push another row of seed into soil and hope this time will be different, consider giving those seeds one quiet night of preparation. Let them wake up with a clearer signal. Let them face the soil with more readiness. Let them begin rooting with more support. That single overnight step can create the kind of head start that echoes for weeks and sometimes for the entire season. If you have ever felt the sting of bare patches where life should have been, if you have ever watched a tray collapse and wondered what you missed, if you have ever looked at another gardener's vigorous plants and thought there must be something they know that you do not, this may be one of those answers, not because it is flashy, because it is complete. Wake the seed, guard the seedling, help the roots. That is the whole strategy. Simple enough to do at home, strong enough to matter, and honest enough that once you try it, the results will speak louder than any promise I can make. This season, do not just plant and wish, prepare and plant. Give your seeds the kind of beginning that turns hope into momentum. Then watch how differently the garden answers back. I am Eli Yoder, and if this message reaches you at just the right moment, before the packets are torn open and the trays are filled, remember this one thought. Most harvest problems do not begin at harvest. They begin at the start. And when the start gets stronger, everything after it has a chance to become something far bigger than ordinary.